The explosion shook the quiet neighborhood like a thunderclap. Windows rattled, alarms blared, and within seconds everyone rushed outside. Smoke billowed from Karen's perfect white chimney, thick, black, and angry. She stood in her driveway, screaming, her hair half singed, shouting something about faulty firewood. But I knew exactly what had happened. You see, for weeks she'd been sneaking into my yard at night, stealing logs from my woodpile, the same pile she once fined me for lowering community standards. Every time I replaced the missing firewood, more disappeared. So I stopped replacing it with regular logs. I got creative, because in an HOA like ours, reason doesn't work with people like Karen. They only learn when things blow up in their face. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to subscribe for more insane HOA stories like this one. Before all the chaos and smoke, life in Maple Ridge Estates used to be quiet. Too quiet, actually. It's one of those HOA neighborhoods that looks like it came straight out of a magazine. White picket, fences, manicured lawns, and neighbors who smile only when someone's watching. I moved here 8 years ago after my wife passed. I figured I could use some peace and maybe a place where the rules kept things simple. I was wrong. At first I kept to myself. I worked from home as a freelance mechanical engineer, doing design work for local factories. My backyard was my little workshop, a smoker, a tool shed, a few benches, and my favorite thing, a neatly stacked woodpile I cut every fall. I liked splitting logs. There's something honest about it, unlike HOA board meetings. Most of my neighbors were decent folks. The Millers next door always brought me pumpkin pie around Thanksgiving. Old Mr. Jenkins would wave every morning while watering his roses. It was peaceful until she moved in, Karen Whitmore. Blonde, mid-50 seconds, always dressed like she was heading to court, even when she was just walking her dog. Within a month, she'd become HOA president. Nobody even remembered voting for her, but somehow she had the clipboard, the whistle, and the power. Karen loved three things: power, attention, and pretending she was saving the neighborhood from decline. She'd walk around with her little camera, snapping pictures of people's mailboxes, measuring grass height with a ruler, and sending out warning letters like she was a one-woman police force. The first time she showed up at my door, she smiled like a politician and handed me a paper. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "your woodpile violates community aesthetic standards. It's visible from the street." I blinked. "Karen, it's behind my shed." She tilted her head. "Well, from certain angles, it disrupts the neighborhood symmetry." I almost laughed. "Symmetry, Karen. It's firewood, not modern art." She didn't laugh. "You'll need to relocate it within 10 days or the HOA will issue a fine." Then she turned and walked off like a judge leaving a courtroom. I didn't move it, I just stacked it neater behind my fence. That should have been the end of it. But Karen never stops. When she feels ignored, she escalates. A week later, I came home from the grocery store and noticed something odd. My woodpile looked smaller. At first, I thought maybe my memory was off. I'm getting older, sure, but not that forgetful. So I counted the logs. I keep track, always have. About 20 pieces were missing. I scratched my head and figured maybe the landscapers took some by mistake, or a neighbor borrowed a few during the cold snap. No big deal. I didn't even lock the gate, it's a small community. But 2 days later, more wood was gone. Then again, always the same pattern. Every other night, about a dozen logs disappeared. I started asking around casually. "Hey, anyone seen someone messing with my woodpile?" Miss Jenkins shrugged. "Probably kids. You know, wintertime mischief." But no kid was lugging 40 pounds of oak logs through the night. By the end of the week, I was losing patience. Not because of the firewood's value, but the nerve of someone trespassing on my property. I kept my yard spotless, followed every dumb HOA rule, paid my dues early, and someone was treating me like a free lumber supplier. So I set up a little test. I stacked the logs with small notches carved on the ends. A craftsman's trick. If any went missing, I'd know exactly which ones. Then, I placed a small motion sensor light near the shed. That night, around 11:30 p.m., the light flicked on. I rushed to the back window, but saw only a shadow slipping through the gate, something shiny catching the moonlight. Too fast to identify. The next morning, sure enough, 4 marked logs were gone. And the grass near the gate was flattened by heels. High heels. Now, there aren't many women in Maple Ridge who go out in heels at midnight. In fact, there's only one I could think of, and she lived 2 doors down. Still, I wasn't ready to accuse anyone. Maybe she was out for a walk, maybe it was coincidence. But the next day I got another letter from the HOA. "Dear Mr. Thompson, your outdoor wood storage continues to violate Section 3 amperes of the HOA code regarding fire hazards and visual appeal. If not remedied, further disciplinary action will be considered. President Karen Whitmore. I nearly choked on my coffee. The audacity. She was fining me for the same wood she'd been stealing. I called her number on the letterhead. No answer. So I drove by her house later that afternoon. And there, through her large front window, I saw my firewood, the same notches I carved, sitting neatly by her fireplace. I stood there in disbelief. She was burning my wood while threatening me for unsightly storage. I could have gone over right then, slammed on her door, and demanded she stop. But I didn't. Because I've learned something about people like Karen: confrontation only feeds them. They thrive on drama and control. If you shout, they win. So instead I smiled to myself and said, "All right, Karen, you want my firewood, you can have it." That night I started thinking like an engineer again. I pulled out my old sketch pad, the one I hadn't used in years, and began drawing. I wasn't planning anything dangerous, just educational. I wanted Karen to feel the consequences of her actions, not just hear about them. I checked my workshop inventory, some hollow logs from a project, leftover black powder from my 4th of July fireworks experiments, and a lot of creative frustration. For the first time in weeks, I actually slept well, because I knew the next chapter in our little HOA drama was about to be explosive. I didn't sleep much the next few nights. Not because I was worried, no, it was excitement, the kind that crawls under your skin when you know you're onto something. I'd been planning the setup in my head like an engineer with a grudge and a sense of humor. But before I could pull the trigger, I needed solid proof, undeniable, irrefutable camera in her face, evidence that Karen was the thief. So I went full surveillance mode. I bought 2 small outdoor security cameras, the kind with night vision and cloud backup, and mounted one above the tool shed, angled perfectly toward the woodpile. The other I hid in the gutter overlooking the backyard gate. They blended in perfectly. You'd have to be Sherlock Holmes to spot them. Then I waited. The first 2 nights, nothing. Just raccoons and a stray cat walking across the frame. But on the 3rd night, at 12:14 a.m., the motion alert pinged on my phone. I opened the app, and there she was, Karen, wearing her beige coat scarf and those same ridiculous heeled boots that had left prints by my fence. She walked straight into my yard, flashlight in hand, like she owned the place. I watched her on the screen, calm as could be, stacking my logs into a neat pile beside her. Then she whispered something to herself. The mic barely caught it. He won't miss it. It's for the community anyway. I almost laughed out loud. The community. Right. She loaded the logs into the back of her SUV, closed the hatch, brushed her hands together like a job well done, and strutted off into the night. The next morning I brewed a pot of coffee, sat down and watched the footage again, just for the satisfaction, frame by frame. It was perfect. She'd even looked right into the camera at one point, unknowingly giving me a clear, smug shot of her face. Now, a normal person would have gone straight to the HOA board or the cops. But I wasn't dealing with a normal person. I was dealing with Karen, queen of technicalities, master of twisting the truth. If I accused her outright, she'd deny everything, and probably hit me with a violation for unauthorized surveillance. So instead, I decided to let her hang herself with her own arrogance. That afternoon, there was a community HOA meeting in the clubhouse. I didn't usually go too much gossip, too many complaints about paint shades and fence heights. But this time I made sure to show up early and grab a front row seat. Karen walked in fashionably late, holding her coffee cup that said "Number Boss Lady." She wore her usual smug smile, the kind that could curdle milk. "All right, everyone," she started, tapping the table. "Let's address the ongoing issue of property, aesthetics, and fire hazards. Specifically, Mr. Thompson's yard." My jaw tightened. I said nothing, just folded my arms. Karen continued. "Despite repeated warnings, Mr. Thompson continues to store unsafe amounts of wood in plain view, posing both a fire and a pest risk. I've documented the violation myself." Someone in the back muttered, "You document everything." A few chuckles rippled across the room. She ignored them. "Effective immediately, the HOA will fine Mr. Thompson $250 for non-compliance and mandate removal of the offending materials within 72 hours. I raised my hand calmly. "Karen, may I speak?" She gave a patronizing smile. "Of course, Tom. Just remember, this is a community meeting, not a debate." I leaned forward. "Great, because I'm not here to debate. I'm here to clarify something. You said you documented my firewood, correct?" "Yes, I did. And that documentation, it's recent." She smirked. "I'd say within the last 48 hours. The room went quiet. I smiled. "Interesting. Because in those 48 hours, half my firewood was stolen." Karen blinked clearly, not expecting that. "Well, maybe you misplaced it." "I don't misplace 80 pounds of oak, Karen." She opened her mouth, but I kept going. Funny thing is, I installed cameras after the second theft. And guess who showed up on video? The color drained from her face. You can't, that's an invasion of privacy. I cut her off, my voice cool. The camera's on my property facing my woodpile. Perfectly legal. Would you like to see the footage? The crowd murmured. Someone gasped. The HOA treasurer leaned over, whispering something to the vice president. Karen stammered. This is harassment. You're twisting this to no, Karen, I said, leaning back. I'm not twisting anything. You were caught red-handed, or maybe red-heeled. Laughter erupted around the room. Even the normally silent HOA secretary had to cover her mouth. Karen's face turned crimson. You're lying. Want me to play the video? I asked, holding up my phone. Because I brought it with me. She froze. You could see the panic behind her eyes, the gears turning, trying to calculate how bad it would look. Finally, she puffed up her chest and hissed, You'll regret this. Then she stormed out. The meeting descended into chaos, people talking over each other, some defending her, others laughing. The vice president finally stood up and said, We'll review this matter further. But I could tell from the looks around the room the tide was turning. People were tired of her tyranny. That night I checked the footage again, saved it to multiple drives, and even emailed a copy to myself just in case she got any bright ideas about data breaches. The next few days were blissfully quiet. No letters. No warnings. No Karen marching past my house. For a moment I thought maybe she'd learned her lesson. But Karen doesn't quit. She retaliates. 3 days later I got a citation in the mail from the HOA for unauthorized security installations visible from the street. My cameras. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. She was doubling down. That's when I decided it was time to move to phase 2. The cameras had done their job, now it was my turn to teach her the real lesson. I opened my workshop door, flipped on the light, and looked at the remaining pile of logs. A wicked grin spread across my face. All right, Karen, I whispered. Let's make your next fireplace a little more memorable. When you've spent 30 years as a mechanical engineer, you don't just see objects, you see possibilities. Every tool, every material, every bolt of wood has potential energy waiting to be directed. And after what Karen pulled, I was about to direct mine. Now, to be clear, I wasn't planning to hurt anyone. I wanted something poetic justice, that is. Something that would make Karen rethink her life choices every time she struck a match. So I started sketching in my workshop late one evening, a cup of black coffee in one hand and my old drafting pencil in the other. On my notepad, I wrote in big block letters, The Firewood Project. It sounded almost professional, like a company name. Thompson's Thermodynamic Retribution. I chuckled to myself. Here was the plan I'd make. A few hollow logs, lightweight but realistic, using some scrap oak I'd saved. Then I'd insert small charges of black powder, not explosives, mind you, just enough to cause a loud pop and a burst of smoke when ignited. The kind of stuff people use for homemade fireworks. Safe but dramatic. It took me a couple of days to get everything right. I drilled out the cores with my lathe, carefully hollowing them halfway, then plugged the ends with bark pieces so they looked solid. The trick was subtlety. The log had to look identical to the others. I brushed them with ash to dull the color, and stacked them right in the middle of the pile among the real wood. Each one was a masterpiece of petty revenge engineering. While I worked, I couldn't help narrating in my head like a YouTube DIY channel. Step 1, identify your Karen. Step 2, wait for her to commit the crime. Step 3, make science fun again. But before setting the trap, I wanted to make sure she was still stealing. It had been a few quiet days since the HOA meeting, and part of me wondered if the humiliation had scared her off. Then again, this was Karen, the kind of person who would rather set her reputation on fire than admit fault. So I gave it time. On the 5th night, I saw a faint flashlight beam cutting through the darkness of my backyard. I watched through the curtains, sipping whiskey, as the silhouette of Karen crept toward my woodpile once again. Her SUV idled by the curb, headlights off, trunk open. She still had the nerve. I whispered to myself. Atta girl. The camera caught everything, the same gloves, the same coat, the same self-satisfied smirk as she loaded my logs into her vehicle. And among those logs were my 3 hollow masterpieces. Once she drove off, I turned off the lights, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled slowly. The job was done. The fuse, metaphorically speaking, was set. The next morning, I went about my routine as usual. Coffee, email, reading the HOA bulletin that had arrived, another gem full of reminder notices from Karen's desk. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony, her name printed right above a paragraph about the importance of neighborly respect. Around noon, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. As I passed Karen's house, I saw her in the driveway chatting with one of her loyal followers, Mrs. Beasley, the HOA treasurer, and self-proclaimed community moral compass. They were standing beside Karen's garage, sipping tea. Behind them, I noticed something new. A shiny steel log holder stacked high with firewood. My firewood. I recognized the exact cut pattern my saw left, a distinct angle that wasn't factory standard. I smiled politely as I walked by. "Morning, ladies," I said. Karen turned her tone clipped and overly sweet. "Good afternoon, Tom. Lovely day, isn't it?" "Oh, perfect weather," I replied. "A bit windy, though. Wouldn't want anything flammable lying around." Her smile tightened. "Don't worry, I know how to handle fire." "I bet you do," I thought. That night, I went to bed early. I wasn't expecting anything spectacular, maybe a loud pop, some smoke, and a frantic Karen waving a broom. But what happened? Well, it was beyond even my imagination. It started around 8:45 p.m. I was watching a rerun of Mythbusters, fittingly enough, when a dull boom echoed through the distance. I turned down the volume, then another boom louder this time, then silence. Followed by the faint, unmistakable sound of someone screaming, "Oh my God!" I stepped out onto my porch and saw a plume of gray smoke rising above the row of houses. The smell of burnt ash drifted faintly through the air. A few neighbors were already gathering in the cul-de-sac, phones out, trying to see what happened. I kept my expression neutral as I walked toward the commotion. Karen's house stood out immediately, her front windows fogged with smoke, her chimney belching like a factory. The decorative wreath on her door was half singed. Karen stood in the yard, hair frizzed, face blackened with soot, wearing a silk robe that now looked like something rescued from a barbecue pit. She was shouting at a firefighter, waving her arms wildly. It just exploded. Out of nowhere, I was burning a few logs, and then boom. The firefighter was trying hard not to smile. "Ma'am, it looks like you had some kind of combustion buildup. Maybe something inside the wood caught fire too fast." Karen blinked. "Are you saying it's my fault?" The man shrugged. "Could be a lot of things. Maybe you bought bad wood." "Oh, I didn't buy it," she said, and then stopped herself mid-sentence. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" She glared at me, realizing what she'd said. "I mean, I sourced it locally." "Sourced," I repeated. "That's one way to put it." Everyone in the crowd turned toward me. The Millers were whispering, Mr. Jenkins was smirking, and even the firefighters looked amused. Karen's face turned the color of her bathrobe, or what was left of it. "I should call the HOA," she snapped. "I think they're already here," I said, nodding toward Mrs. Beasley, who had just arrived, phone in hand, and looking absolutely mortified. "Karen," Mrs. Beasley whispered, "people are talking. Did you really know?" Karen barked. "I would never steal," I interrupted her softly. "Funny, because I have the footage that says otherwise." Karen's jaw dropped. The firefighters exchanged glances. At that moment, I didn't even feel angry anymore, just satisfied. Like watching a perfectly engineered system complete its function, precise, efficient, inevitable. That night, after the fire trucks left and the neighborhood settled down, I sat on my porch with a cold beer and looked at the faint orange glow still flickering through Karen's windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I raised my glass and whispered to the stars, to science. The morning after the incident, the neighborhood group chat was pure chaos. My phone buzzed nonstop. "Did you hear the explosion? Karen's fireplace blew up, I swear. I saw sparks shoot out of her chimney." I sipped my coffee and scrolled through the messages, pretending to be just another concerned neighbor. "Hope she's okay," I typed with a perfectly measured dose of sincerity. By noon, a fire inspection truck was parked outside Karen's house, along with 2 HOA board members, and of course Karen herself still shaking off the embarrassment like a wet cat. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a hat that screamed, "Don't look at me," but everyone was looking anyway. I couldn't resist. I strolled over with my mug, casual as ever. "Morning, Karen," I said cheerfully. "Rough night." Her head snapped toward me like a turret locking on target. "This isn't funny, Tom. My fireplace exploded. It could have killed me. Good thing it didn't," I replied evenly. "You should probably be careful about where you get your firewood." She flinched. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, I don't know," I said with a half smile. "Sometimes you think you're getting free wood, but it comes with surprises." The HOA treasurer, Mrs. Beasley, looked between us nervously. "Are you two?" Implying something, Karen turned to her, voice rising. "He's accusing me of something ridiculous. He's obsessed with me." That one made me laugh out loud. "Obsessed, Karen, you've been sneaking into my yard like it's a Black Friday sale." The inspector cleared his throat, interrupting. "All right, folks, let's stay focused. Mrs. Whitmore, I've examined the remnants of the firewood in your fireplace. It seems a few logs contained, well, some sort of reactive powder. Probably black powder residue." Karen gasped theatrically. "Black powder." You mean explosives? The inspector frowned. Not in a dangerous amount. Looked more like fireworks material. Small combustion, nothing military grade. Karen's lips curled into a sneer as she turned toward me. See, he did this. He planted explosives in the firewood to kill me. The HOA members gasped. I stayed completely calm, took a slow sip from my mug and said, "That's a bold accusation, Karen. Especially since you've admitted on record just now that the wood came from me." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for logic. I didn't. You can't prove anything." "Oh, but I can," I said, reaching into my pocket. "Remember the cameras, the ones you find me for. They're very handy. Want to see the footage?" The crowd around us started whispering. Even Mrs. Beasley leaned closer, curiosity glowing brighter than her pearls. Karen's voice wavered. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I tapped my phone. The screen lit up, showing her on video dragging logs through the gate with that same smug grin. I zoomed in frame by frame until her face filled the screen. "There you are, middle of the night on my property. Quite the community service you're doing." The silence that followed was priceless. You could have heard a pine needle drop. Then somewhere behind us, a kid burst out laughing. "Mom, that's the lady who yelled at me for riding my bike too fast." That broke the spell. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others smirking. Karen's face turned a shade of red I didn't think was biologically possible. She tried to recover voice, trembling with false authority. "This is harassment. You're all witnesses. He's violating my privacy. On my property, I cut in smoothly, with my cameras, and you trespassed. Want me to call the sheriff to clarify whose privacy was violated here?" She froze. For the first time, I saw genuine fear behind those oversized sunglasses. The inspector spoke again, clearly trying not to take sides. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'd advise against further comment. The footage speaks for itself." The HOA treasurer sighed. "Karen, this looks really bad." Karen's voice cracked. "You're all turning against me. After everything I've done for this neighborhood, I couldn't resist the jab." "Oh, we appreciate all your hard work, Karen. Especially cleaning up my firewood for me." That earned a laugh from half the crowd. Even the inspector smiled behind his clipboard. She spun toward me, jabbing a finger in the air. "You'll pay for this, Tom. I'll sue you for intentional harm, property sabotage, emotional distress." "Emotional distress," I said, feigning concern. "Was that before or after you trespassed, stole, and burned evidence of the crime?" The sheriff's car pulled up right on cue. Turns out one of the neighbors had called earlier thinking the explosion might have been foul play. The deputy stepped out, Officer Ramirez, a calm, no-nonsense guy I'd chatted with a few times about community safety. "What's going on here?" he asked. Karen rushed to him. "Officer, arrest him. He booby-trapped firewood to hurt me." Ramirez held up a hand. "All right, slow down, one at a time." I handed him my phone with the video paused at the perfect frame Karen mid-theft under full moonlight. "Here's my footage, officer." That's her stealing the logs in question. I filed no complaint because I was giving her time to return them. Then, well, they exploded. He watched quietly for a few seconds. Then he looked at her. "Ma'am, is this you?" Karen swallowed. "That's not, you can't tell." He raised an eyebrow. "It's you, Mrs. Whitmore. Same clothes, same car license plate, clear as day. This is trespassing and theft." The color drained from her face again. You're not actually." Ramirez sighed. "Look, no one's pressing criminal charges yet, but I'm documenting this as a warning. Any further incidents, and it becomes official." She spun toward me, desperate. "You planned this. You set me up." I shrugged. "I set up cameras. You set yourself up." The neighbors chuckled. Karen's composure cracked completely. "You're all monsters. You think this is funny? I run this neighborhood." Mrs. Beasley whispered to another board member. "Not anymore, she doesn't." Karen heard it. That was the final straw. She stomped toward her SUV, got in, and slammed the door. The engine roared, and she peeled off down the street, tires screeching. The crowd slowly dispersed. Ramirez turned to me and said quietly, "You handled that better than most would have. Just don't build any more science experiments, all right?" I laughed. "No promises." That night, I sat by my fire pit, the same pit that started it all. I threw on a fresh log, a real one this time, and watched it crackle in the darkness. The smell of oak smoke filled the air. For the first time in months, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. No rule memos, no measuring tape patrols, no HOA letters slipped under my door. Just silence, broken only by the sound of the flames. I lifted my beer toward the glowing coals and said softly, "To poetic justice." Somewhere in the distance, I imagined Karen still scrubbing soot off her fireplace, muttering about negligence and disrespect, and I smiled. For a few blissful days, the neighborhood went eerily quiet. No HOA letters. No measuring tape patrols. No Karen marching down the street like a self-appointed sheriff. I should have enjoyed the peace, but deep down I knew it wouldn't last. Karen wasn't the kind of person to let humiliation die quietly. I was right. 3 mornings later, I found an envelope taped to my front door stamped with the HOA seal. Inside was a formal notice, subject pending disciplinary action. Mr. Thompson, you are hereby summoned to attend a special HOA hearing concerning your violation of community safety protocols, unauthorized security installations, and possible acts of endangerment. Failure to attend will result in fines and further legal review. Sincerely, President, HOA Board, signed Karen Whitmore. I laughed out loud. The woman gets caught stealing and still finds a way to schedule a meeting. She was bold, I'll give her that. But if she wanted a showdown, I was more than ready. That evening, I gathered my evidence, camera footage, the inspection report from the fire marshal, and even a few printed screenshots from the neighborhood group chat showing people confirming the explosion came from her fireplace. By the time I finished, I had a folder thicker than a college thesis. The HOA meeting was set for Thursday night at the community clubhouse, the same beige room where Karen had humiliated me weeks ago. Fitting place for a reversal of fortune. When I arrived, the parking lot was full. Word had spread fast. People love drama, especially HOA drama. Even folks who usually skipped meetings were there, whispering excitedly like they'd come for a courtroom showdown. Karen sat at the head of the long table, chin raised, flanked by her loyalists, Mrs. Beasley, who looked like she wanted to sink into her chair, and 2 newer board members who wore matching expressions of regret. Mr. Thompson, Karen said as I entered, her tone sharp. Please take a seat. We'll begin shortly. Thank you, Madam President, I said with mock politeness. Though I'm surprised you're still calling yourself that. Her nostrils flared, but she kept her voice cool. We'll see who keeps their title after tonight, the audience murmured. You could feel the tension buzzing in the air like static. Karen launched into her official statement, filled with words like reckless, malicious intent, and endangerment. She claimed my booby-trapped firewood caused a public safety hazard and that my cameras were an invasion of privacy. When she finished, she crossed her arms, satisfied. Mr. Thompson, she said smugly, you may now defend yourself if you can. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and smiled. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate the dramatic build-up. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. I placed my folder on the table, flipped it open, and began slowly, deliberately. First of all, let's review some facts. You claim I endangered the community. Yet, according to the fire inspector's report, I held up the document. The explosion occurred inside your fireplace using stolen materials from my property. Isn't that right? Karen's lips tightened. I tapped my phone, projecting a still frame from the video onto the TV in the room. Karen, under moonlight, loading my logs into her SUV. Gasps filled the room. Oh, I think you did, I continued. This video was recorded legally from my property. It clearly shows you trespassing, removing personal items, and... That's fake, she shouted, standing up. It's not, I said calmly. Officer Ramirez reviewed it himself, and you received an official warning. Or did you forget that part? Her voice faltered. He misunderstood. Misunderstood, I raised an eyebrow. Did he misunderstand your fireplace too? Because I've got witness statements from 3 neighbors who saw the smoke billowing out of your chimney like Mount Vesuvius. Laughter erupted. Even Mrs. Beasley tried and failed to suppress a grin. Karen slammed her hand on the table. This is all part of your vendetta. You hate me because I enforce the rules. Karen, I said, voice low and steady, nobody hates you because you enforce rules. They hate you because you make them up. That landed hard. A few people clapped. Someone even whistled. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for backup. You're all letting him get away with sabotage. He could have burned down my house. I spread my hands. Then maybe don't steal from people's yards. Basic physics, no fuel, no fire. Mrs. Beasley finally spoke, her voice trembling but firm. Karen, the boards reviewed the video. We can't ignore what it shows. Karen spun toward her. You're siding with him. After everything I've done for you, I made you Treasurer. Beasley sighed. You also fined me for having wind chimes. The room erupted in laughter again. Karen was unraveling fast. This entire neighborhood is ungrateful. You need me. Without me, this place will fall apart. A man in the back called out, We'll take our chances. Karen's voice cracked. "You can't do this. You can't vote me out." The vice president, a quiet retired attorney named Wilson, stood up slowly. "Actually," he said, adjusting his glasses according to HOA bylaws, "the board can call an emergency vote if a sitting president acts against community interest." "Shall we?" Karen's face froze. "You wouldn't dare." Wilson raised his hand. "All in favor of removing Mrs. Whitmore as HOA president?" One by one hands went up, first hesitantly, then confidently. Beasley's hand rose too. Even the new members followed. Then, almost every person in the audience lifted their hands. Wilson nodded. Motion carried. Karen looked around in disbelief, trembling. "You're firing me." "Not firing," Wilson said gently. "Relieving you of duty." For a moment she just stood there silent. Then, without warning, she grabbed her purse, muttered something about lawyers, and stormed out of the room, the same dramatic exit she'd made before, only this time no one followed her. When the door slammed behind her, the entire clubhouse erupted into applause. Someone shouted, "Long live common sense." Another yelled, "Karen free zone, finally." I just stood there smiling quietly. It was over. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me. The Millers brought cookies the next morning. Even old Mr. Jenkins stopped by and said, "Well, son, that was one hell of a fireworks show in more ways than one." Within a week, the board announced new policies, fewer fines, more transparency, actual community votes. The neighborhood started to breathe again. People waved more, talked more, laughed more. Without Karen's shadow hanging over everyone, Maple Ridge felt like a neighborhood again, not a dictatorship. As for Karen, rumor had it she moved 2 towns over into another HOA. God help them. One night, as I sat by my fire pit again, the flames dancing softly in the dark, I thought about the irony of it all. Karen had always accused me of being a fire hazard, yet she was the one who nearly burned her reputation to ashes. I poked at the coals and chuckled. Guess karma burns hotter than oak. If you had told me a few months earlier that my prim, rule-obsessed neighbor, the self-proclaimed savior of Maple Ridge Estates, would one day be the most hated person in town, I'd have laughed. But after that fateful HOA meeting, Karen's empire of control collapsed faster than her fireplace. It started small. The morning after the vote, her usual HOA emails stopped arriving. No more reminder notices about recycling bins, no more community decor guidelines. It was eerie, like waking up in a town that had been freed from dictatorship overnight. For a brief, glorious moment, everyone just exhaled. But Karen didn't take her dethronement quietly. She began waging a one-woman propaganda campaign, handwritten flyers, printed newsletters, and passive-aggressive posts in the neighborhood Facebook group. Her message, that she had been betrayed by a mob of ungrateful homeowners led by a dangerous man with explosives. She even used a new name for herself online, Karen for Community Safety. I couldn't help but admire her persistence. If shamelessness were a currency, she'd be a billionaire. One of her first moves was filing a formal complaint with the county office accusing the HOA board of corruption, gender discrimination, and conspiracy. The county clerk probably still has her name highlighted in neon on their complaint list. Meanwhile, the neighborhood carried on as if nothing happened. The new board president, Wilson, turned out to be a calm, reasonable guy who actually listened to people. Under his leadership, rules were relaxed, and for the first time the HOA hosted a summer barbecue, something Karen had previously banned for smoke visibility concerns. I was the honorary grill master. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Halfway through flipping burgers, Mrs. Beasley came over with a lemonade and whispered, "You know, I used to be scared of her. I think everyone was." "Fear's her fuel," I said. "Take it away, and she runs out of gas." Beasley chuckled. "Well, now she's running out of friends, too. Heard she tried to start her own HOA Facebook page. Only 2 people joined, and one of them was her cousin from Arizona." I grinned. Guess the community finally voted with their unfollow buttons. But Karen wasn't done. About a week later, she staged her comeback. Around 9 a.m., while I was trimming hedges, I noticed a moving truck parked outside her house. I thought she might be leaving, but then she emerged, arms full of cardboard signs. Each one had a message in bold red marker: "Fraudulent HOA vote, unsafe neighborhood under new management, Thompson's firewood, caused chemical injury." She hammered them into her own front yard like a protester staging a revolution of one. I set down my hedge trimmer, leaned on the fence, and called out Morning Karen. "You opening an art gallery?" She didn't even look at me. "You think this is funny, don't you? You humiliated me in front of everyone. But people will know the truth." "Funny," I said. "The truth's been pretty loud lately. You might have missed it under the sound of explosions." Her jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." "Already did," I said. Every time I tried being polite, she stormed back into her house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. By the next day, her signs were gone courtesy of the HOA's new rule against obstruction of community view. The irony of her own old policies being used against her was delicious. Still, word spread that she was planning to sue me personally. I half expected a knock from the sheriff, but instead I got something better, a knock from Wilson, the new HOA president. "Tom," he said smiling, "I think you'll appreciate this." He handed me a thick envelope, a copy of the cease and desist order the HOA had issued against her. Apparently Karen had been harassing board members, showing up uninvited at meetings, and spamming residents with angry letters. "She's officially banned from HOA premises for 6 months, Wilson said. I raised my eyebrows. That might be the most peaceful half-year of my life. We both laughed. But fate has a sense of humor. 2 days later, Karen's water heater burst, flooding her basement. She called the HOA maintenance line, the same line she used to micromanage, and was told very politely that she was no longer eligible for HOA maintenance assistance. I wish I could say I didn't enjoy hearing her screaming through her front door at the plumber. I really do. But I enjoyed it immensely. By late summer, she finally cracked. One morning I woke up to see a for sale sign planted in her yard, bright red and freshly painted. Rumor had it she was moving to a more civilized community 3 counties away. The day the moving truck arrived, half the neighborhood came out to walk their dogs or get the mail. People weren't subtle. Even Mr. Jenkins brought out a lawn chair. Karen was furious. "You're all vultures," she shouted, waving her arms as the movers loaded her furniture. Ungrateful, ignorant, small-minded. Careful, I called out from my porch, the last person who called us that had an unfortunate run-in with their fireplace. That earned a round of muffled laughter. Karen glared daggers at me, then turned away, climbing into her SUV. As she drove off, she stopped right in front of my house, rolled down the window and shouted, "You haven't seen the last of me, Thompson." I raised my beer and smiled. "If I do, I'll install another camera." She slammed the gas pedal, and just like that, she was gone. For a long moment, the neighborhood stood in silence. Then, as if on cue, someone started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the whole street erupted into applause and cheers. It was like we'd all been released from a long collective nightmare. Wilson walked over, grinning. "Well, Tom, I think it's safe to say you're a local hero." "Hero's a strong word," I said, chuckling. "I just lit the fuse." He laughed. "Literally." From that day on, life at Maple Ridge changed completely. The new board was fair and transparent. The petty letters stopped. The annual barbecue became a regular tradition. Even Karen's old no decorations rule was scrapped, and come December, the neighborhood lit up like a Christmas movie. I'd sit by my fire pit most evenings, sometimes joined by neighbors who'd bring over drinks and stories. Every so often someone would bring up the great firewood explosion, and we'd all laugh until our sides hurt. Sometimes I'd think back to the start of it all, the stolen logs, the ridiculous fines, the camera footage that started a revolution. Funny how something so small could spark such big change. And maybe that was the real lesson in an HOA, as in life sometimes the only way to fight nonsense is with a little well-aimed chaos. I leaned back in my chair watching the flames dance against the night sky. The air was calm, the stars bright, and for the first time in a long while Maple Ridge felt like home again. The first autumn after Karen left was the calmest Maple Ridge had been in years. For the first time, the sound of lawnmowers, kids' laughter, and friendly chatter replaced the shrill echo of HOA citations. You could almost feel the weight lifted off the air, like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. I remember walking down the street, one chilly morning coffee mug in hand, watching neighbors string up lights for the upcoming harvest festival. Something Karen would have called a community hazard due to electrical clutter. Now it was a celebration. Mrs. Miller waved at me from her porch. "Tom, we're hosting chili night next weekend. You're bringing the wood, right?" I laughed. "Real wood this time, I promise." "Good," she said, winking. "We don't need fireworks indoors." That joke had become legend around here. Even new residents who'd moved in after Karen's exile knew the story. They'd lower their voices like it was a ghost tale the night Karen's fireplace went boom. Some said it was exaggerated, others swore it was justice. I never confirmed or denied it. A good myth needs mystery. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. My backyard workshop became a small neighborhood hub. People dropped by not to complain, but to borrow tools, ask advice, or just talk. I'd built a new fire pit a little bigger this time, lined with stone surrounded by wooden benches. Every weekend we'd gather there, families, couples, kids, even Wilson, the new HOA president. We'd roast marshmallows, grill steaks, swap stories. And every once in a while someone would glance toward the old corner lot where Karen's house used to stand. After she left, it sat empty for months. Realtors came and went. Buyers would tour the place, then leave shaking their heads. Some said it was overpriced, others said it had bad energy. Eventually, a retired couple bought it. Sweet people, they planted flowers out front, and even hosted a welcome brunch for the whole block. When I walked up their driveway with a basket of firewood, yes, regular wood, the husband smiled. "You're the guy from the story, huh? Depends which version you heard," I said. He chuckled. "The one where you outsmarted a tyrant with a pile of kindling." I shrugged. "That sounds about right." He handed me a beer. "Good man. Every neighborhood needs someone who stands up to nonsense." Maybe he was right. Or maybe I'd just gotten lucky. Lucky that karma decided to use me as its delivery driver. A few weeks later, I was back in my workshop tinkering with a small project when a familiar voice startled me. "Still playing with fire, I see." I turned around and froze. Karen. She stood by the open gate, arms crossed, wearing sunglasses and a scarf, as if she'd just walked out of a courtroom drama. Her hair was darker, now cut shorter, but that posture, that mix of pride and resentment, hadn't changed a bit. I wiped my hands on a rag. "Well, I'll be damned." The ghost returns. She stepped closer. "I just came to get the rest of my things." "Your things?" I asked, confused. "You sold the house." She hesitated. "Some decorations. In the shed. The new owners said I could pick them up." I studied her face. There was no fire in her eyes this time, just exhaustion. She looked smaller somehow, like the years had finally caught up to her. "All right," I said. "Shed's around back. But I'll come with you. Wouldn't want you taking the wrong firewood again." That earned me the faintest smirk. As we walked, she glanced around the yard. "You've made the place nicer." "Thanks," I said. "It's easier when no one's threatening to fine you for existing." She sighed. "I wasn't trying to be cruel, Tom. I just wanted things to be orderly. Controlled." "Yeah," I said softly. "That's the problem. People aren't meant to live under control, not like that. A neighborhood isn't a military base." She didn't answer. Just opened the shed, took out a dusty box, and stared at it for a while. "You made me the joke of this town," she said quietly. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Karen, you did that to yourself." I just held up the mirror. For a moment she looked like she wanted to argue. Then her shoulders dropped, and she nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." When she turned to leave, she paused at the gate. "You know they call me HOA Karen online now. Someone even made a meme." "Internet's undefeated," I said with a small grin. She didn't smile back. "Take care, Tom." And just like that, she walked away, no threats, no yelling, no fanfare. For the first time, Karen left quietly. I stood there for a long while, staring at the empty street. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and ash. I couldn't help but feel something. Not pity exactly, more like closure. Because the truth was, Karen wasn't just a villain. She was a warning of what happens when control becomes obsession, when pride blinds you to decency. That night, the neighborhood gathered again around the fire pit. The flames flickered against the circle of smiling faces, faces that had once avoided eye contact for fear of being fined for improper lighting. Wilson raised his glass. "To peace, and to the man who reminded us that standing up to bullies never goes out of style." Everyone cheered. Someone shouted, "To Tom in the great firewood incident." I laughed, lifting my bottle. "To Karen," I said, smirking. "May her next neighborhood have better insurance." The whole circle burst out laughing. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, I leaned back and watched sparks drift into the sky. They looked like tiny stars breaking free, wild, bright, untamed. And I realized something: revenge had never really been the point. It wasn't about payback. It was about balance, about reminding people that respect once taken for granted will eventually demand to be restored. Sometimes through words, sometimes through fire. When I finally headed inside, I glanced one last time at the glowing embers. They pulsed gently in the darkness like a heartbeat. Peaceful, alive. And for the first time since I'd moved to Maple Ridge, I felt truly home. In life, there's a fine line between order and control, and once you cross it, even good intentions can turn toxic. Karen thought she was protecting the community, but she was really suffocating it. Her downfall wasn't caused by firewood or fireworks. It was caused by arrogance, by the belief that she was untouchable. And maybe that's why stories like this resonate. Because we've all met a Karen at some point, someone who uses power to belittle others, who mistakes control for leadership. But when truth and patience collide with that kind of ego, justice has a way of showing up. Sometimes loud, sometimes messy, but always poetic. So here's the lesson: respect goes both ways. Treat people fairly, mind your own yard, And don't steal someone else's wood, literal or metaphorical. What would you have done in my place? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to subscribe for more wild, true-to-life HOA dramas. Because in this neighborhood, karma always collects.